What if I told you my parents sold my property while I was under anesthesia and expected me to forgive them? I'm Mila. I'm 30 years old. And the first thing I learned after waking up from surgery wasn't about my recovery. It was about betrayal. I went in for emergency spinal surgery, the kind where delaying it risks permanent damage. When I woke up hours later, my body still felt distant, like I hadn't fully come back yet. My back was locked in pain, my head foggy, my arms heavy. Before a nurse spoke, I noticed my phone lighting up beside the bed. Missed calls, dozens of them. Your body reacts before your brain does. My chest tightened immediately. Nobody calls that many times unless something is wrong. My hands shook as I opened the voicemail from my father. His voice was rushed but calm, too calm. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't mention the surgery. He said, "We sold your condo. The money covered your sister's wedding. You were unconscious, so we signed for you. It just made sense." For a second, I honestly thought I misheard him. That condo wasn't just a place I lived. It was my safety. Years of overtime shifts. Missed holidays. Saying no to comfort so I could own something outright. It was the one thing that made me feel secure in a life where I'd always had to rely on myself. And they sold it while I was unconscious. When I finally called him back, every small movement sent pain through my spine. He answered immediately, almost cheerful, like he'd been waiting for approval. He explained how the money paid for the venue, the decorations, the upgrades. When I asked how they could legally do this, he said something that made everything crystal clear. "We're family. You would have agreed." That's when it hit me. They didn't just take my money. They took my voice. I remembered my mother crying when I signed the hospital consent forms. My father promising to handle everything so I could focus on healing. I trusted them enough to hand over my phone before anesthesia, believing my life would still be respected while I was under. I was wrong. What hurt most was knowing my sister never once asked if I was okay. Lying there, barely able to sit up on my own, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision, made without me, about me. And as the shock settled in, I realized this wasn't the first time they decided my life for me. It was just the first time I refused to stay quiet. I kept asking myself the same question. How could they legally sell something I owned while I was unconscious? The answer came faster than I expected, and it made everything worse. 2 days after I woke up, a hospital social worker helped me request the sale documents. She wasn't there to take sides or offer opinions. This was procedural, paperwork, facts. That alone told me something was wrong. When the documents arrived, the picture finally came into focus. My parents hadn't acted randomly. They had prepared. Buried in the paperwork was a narrow authorization form. Not a full power of attorney, something quieter, easier to overlook. A document I had signed years earlier during a routine refinancing process. At the time, I was told it was temporary. Just in case. Standard family convenience. I never imagined it would be used like this. The form didn't give them full control over my property, but it gave them just enough access to move quickly. Enough to sign while I was medically incapacitated. Enough to make it look legitimate before anyone thought to question it. And they didn't decide this while I was in surgery. The timeline told a different story. Email records showed the condo had been discussed weeks earlier. Valuations requested. A realtor contacted. Conversations framed around timing. The sale only closed while I was unconscious, but the decision had been sitting there, waiting for the right moment. That realization hurt more than the physical pain. Because it meant this wasn't panic. It was planning. And then I noticed something else. My sister's name appeared in messages about deposits and deadlines. Nothing explicit. Nothing that crossed a legal line. But enough to make one thing clear, she knew money was coming from somewhere. She just didn't ask where or who it would cost. No one did. As I slowly worked through recovery, I stopped replaying individual arguments and started seeing the pattern underneath them. The way I was always expected to understand. The way my independence was treated like an inconvenience. The way decisions about my life were discussed without me, even when I was fully capable. This wasn't a one-time betrayal. It was a system that finally worked against me when I couldn't push back. By the time I was discharged, one truth settled in completely. They didn't believe they'd done anything wrong. To them, it was practical, efficient, necessary. And once I understood that this wasn't an accident but a calculated choice, I stopped asking why they did it. I started asking something else. Because if they believed this was finished, they had no idea what I still had in my hands. While they were busy believing the story was finished, I realized something they never considered. They thought I was powerless. Recovery moved slowly. Every step was careful, measured. From the outside, I looked exactly how they expected me to look, tired, focused on healing, not fighting back. That assumption worked in my favor, because while my body recovered, my thinking finally sharpened. The condo wasn't my only plan. It never had been. Years before the surgery, long before any crisis, I had made a quiet decision. I'd watched how money moved in my family, who was protected, who was backed, and who was told to figure it out. Independence was praised, but never supported. So I created my own support. I bought a second property. Small, fully paid off, registered only in my name. No shared access, no co-signers, no paperwork anyone else could touch. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. It wasn't a secret out of spite. It was insurance. That decision meant something important now. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't cornered. And because they didn't know it existed, they acted with confidence and carelessness. They believed selling the condo had left me exposed. Dependent. Quiet. They assumed time and pressure would do the rest. I let them believe that. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't correct assumptions. I didn't ask for explanations. Silence was more useful than anger. Instead, I made one phone call. Not to my parents, not to my sister. I called a lawyer. I didn't frame it as a family argument. I laid out facts, the surgery, the medical records showing I was incapacitated, the documents they used, and how an authorization meant for limited use had been stretched beyond its limits. I expected questions. I expected caution. What I got was silence. Then he said calmly, "This is serious." That was the moment everything shifted, because I understood something they still didn't. The leverage wasn't the house. It was time, documentation, and the fact that they believed nothing was coming. And while they focused on final plans and celebrations, I focused on preparation, quietly, carefully, without warning anyone. Because while they were counting down to a big day, I was setting things in motion that would interrupt everything, all at once. Nothing looked wrong at first. That was the most unsettling part. From the outside, everything moved forward exactly as planned. Group messages buzzed. Vendors confirmed schedules. Countdown reminders kept coming. Anyone watching casually would have assumed nothing had changed. But underneath it, things were already grinding down. The first move wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. My lawyer sent out notices, not accusations, not threats. Just formal requests. Document preservation letters. Clarifications that required answers. Language that stayed neutral but carried weight. No one panics when they're innocent, but everyone slows down when risk appears. Banks were notified that a transaction involving a medically incapacitated owner was under review. The wording was careful, professional, impossible to ignore. And the response was immediate, not emotionally, but procedurally. Suddenly, nothing moved without confirmation. The realtor emailed asking for clarification, then followed up, then stopped using friendly language altogether. Everything shifted to pending verification and internal review. That's how systems react when something isn't right. They don't explode. They hesitate. I stayed silent. That was intentional. Every assumption my parents had made depended on one belief, that the money was settled, the paperwork finished, and time was on their side. That belief was now unstable. About 2 weeks before the wedding, small problems surfaced. A deposit that hadn't cleared yet. A vendor asking to reconfirm the payment source. A venue manager requesting updated authorization. Not cancellations, not confrontations, just friction. Enough to make planning stressful. Enough to make confidence crack. My father called me for the first time since the hospital. His voice wasn't angry, it was cautious. He asked if I had spoken to anyone. I told him I was focused on physical therapy. That answer unsettled him more than any accusation would have. After that, the messages changed. Shorter, sharper, disguised as concern. My sister texted a dress color and added, "Please don't make things complicated." I didn't reply. Behind the scenes, my lawyer confirmed what I already felt. Once a transaction is flagged, institutions stop assuming. They start protecting themselves, and self-protection creates delays. No one had been accused yet. No one had lost anything yet. But plans built on certainty were now built on questions. And with every unanswered question, the pressure quietly grew. They still believed the day would arrive exactly as planned. They just didn't realize how much of that plan was already unraveling. The silence didn't break with an argument. It broke when pretending stopped being an option. 2 days before the wedding, the funds connected to the condo sale were placed under review. No accusations, no warnings. Just a formal notice copied to every party involved. The bank, the venue, the closing agent. Vendors who were expecting final payments suddenly weren't sure where the money stood. That's how it became real, not privately. Publicly enough that no one could smooth it over. My father came to my door that afternoon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just looked smaller. Like certainty had finally drained out of him. He asked one question. "What did you do?" I told him the truth. "I didn't do anything. I let people look." There was nothing else to say after that. Once institutions start asking questions, explanations stop being personal. They become documented, timed, compared, medical records, authorization limits, signatures examined next to each other. By the next morning, the venue requested an urgent meeting. Vendors paused services. Everything that depended on unquestioned certainty now depended on verification. My sister called. She was crying, angry. She said I was ruining everything, that I could have waited. That family shouldn't handle things this way. I listened. Then I said one sentence. "You used money that wasn't yours, taken while I was unconscious." She didn't respond. She hung up. That was the revenge, not humiliation, not shouting, not punishment for its own sake. Just forcing the truth to exist in spaces where it couldn't be ignored. The wedding still happened. Smaller, reduced, quiet in the ways people notice but don't discuss. I didn't attend. I was home, standing on my own feet without assistance for the first time, holding documents that confirmed something more permanent than money. They no longer controlled my life or the story they told about it. Some endings aren't loud. They're final. If you want more stories like this, you can subscribe. All the stories here are real,